Hey guys, it's Bethany Quinn, and this is Quintersectional Conversations. I'm here today with Jack Whitsitt, who is an expert in cybersecurity and other awesome things that we're going to talk about. So, hey Jack, thanks so much for joining.
Appreciate it, Bethany. It's lovely to
You,
be here today.
you look like you are on your deck. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'm out in Beach Mountain, North Carolina. We got out of Charlotte. It was kind of a death trap down there. It was a little bit sketch. And we live right now next to a ski resort. So
Awesome.
it's mid-May. It's still been snowing, but it's beautiful out today. So loving it.
Sweet. Wait, you said it's snowing?
It was snowing as recently as like 3 or 4 days ago. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize North Carolina was part of the band that got the snow.
Yeah, but I guess this is why they put a ski resort here. It gets a reasonable amount of snow.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. So sorry, so I'm like grabbing a couple of things. So you've had a pretty I guess we should jump to it. So you've had actually a pretty interesting and kind of, I feel like around, give me just a second. So we have squirrels, had squirrels on our back porch, and so there was a service that was taking the squirrels away off of the back porch. Anyway,
uh,
so I'm gonna be making ricotta gnocchi while we chat.
I'm a little bit jealous of you. That sounds delicious.
Hopefully it'll be good. So how did you get you right now are working? You're like a VP of cybersecurity or something for a big bank.
I
How did you
do.
get there?
Ah, man, that's a long story. I like problem solving really, and remarkably like philosophy. So what we're doing right now is risk forecasting. So we're trying to help folks estimate how much exposure they have if they make different cybersecurity decisions or different things in the world change, like, I don't know, a pandemic. So some of the fun parts of that is you get to try and help people articulate their own mental models of the world about cybersecurity. Nobody has quite the same picture about why they're doing what they do, or how much it matters. And we start getting to really fun questions like, well, how do you measure how much cybersecurity matters to somebody? Some people will say dollars, but a dollar means something different to somebody who's homeless, or you, or the CEO, or there's something more there beyond just how much money gets lost or how much money gets spent. It's when it happens. And um, we working in finance, a lot of our business is trust.
Mhm.
And so how do you forecast if we don't fix this vulnerability, or if China decides to start hacking something? How do you measure how much trust you might lose?
Interesting.
So it's kind of cool. So to answer your question, really indirectly, I started in cybersecurity, but I'm more interested in the problem solving. I'm a frameworks geek. I arrange information. So that's really what I'm doing these days more than anything else, is helping people articulate their problems and figuring out how to measure it for them.
Very cool. And so where were you, like, talk to me about, like, how did you, I don't actually know that much about your career. I just know this was a bit of a right turn for you. So where did you start out?
I started out just doing some open source security development. I read a book when I was in my early 20s that really stuck with me. It was easy to read, but it was also powerful. And I started in the space in the late 90s, early 2000s. So around then, you could do something new just by throwing a book at something. Wherever that book landed was something somebody hadn't thought of before. So it was a lot of fun to really get into security at that point. It's much more of an industry these days. There's a lot higher consequence, but it was a lot more fun when I started, and there was a lot more, you know, space to just make up a new idea and have it run. So I started out doing free open source work, and that's actually how I got to DC. One of my friends decided we were going to speak at a conference about what we were working on, and
And what were you working on?
a way to trap bad guys so that they thought they were attacking something that they weren't, and start
Got it.
recording it. But the thing
Cool.
is, we hadn't built anything, and we had a conference in 3 months, so we had to sort of take the stuff that we were talking about over beers and vodka and make it real in 3 months. We got in front of like 300 people at a conference in Detroit, and this is my first time speaking in public ever. And my colleague brings up a big bottle of rum to the podium. He's like, "Excuse me if I slur, I'm very drunk." And so that was my first. That's how I got into cybersecurity. That was my first real moment.
Oh my,
so
wait,
so it's
was
fun.
it a joke? Was it like a bit, or they were
Oh,
actually drunk?
oh no, we had to pick him off the floor later. Like literally pick him off the floor. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's how you want to be remembered.
correct. So um,
So okay, so you came to DC.
so I came to DC, and I like I did analysis work for sort of a what was a startup at the time that MCI and Verizon eventually bought. Really in sequence, they sort of consumed each other, and so we were basically detecting bad activity. And what was nice is nobody really cared what we were doing. We weren't the hyper profitable part of the business. We were the necessary part of the business. So they left us alone to make up how to do cool stuff, and that gave
Nice.
that whole team an opportunity to do really unusual and neat things and solve problems. I figured out that I didn't have the data I wanted, so I built better tools. I figured out I have good tools, but I still can't quite find what I want to find or do what I want to do. And then I figured out people were just making bad decisions overall. They didn't understand how to interact with cybersecurity. They weren't communicating clearly. So over the years, that's really been my focus, is how to help people make better decisions. And for example, one of the large companies, we were monitoring a bunch of their stuff that was in a lab, and we kept calling them and you know letting them know somebody was hacking to the lab, and they'd call us back every time, be like, "We know that's what it's there for." um, you know so the whole idea of tying consequence to what people do. Everybody knows you need
Dangerous
cybersecurity,
to
but they don't
do.
know why, and they don't know much. So that was where I started hyper technical, hyper data oriented. It was some of the most fun I had. Was we got to do data visualizations, which turned into art projects. Like
Oh,
I
very
the
cool.
Yeah, we've hung some at a couple of like open shows. Certainly some of it was, I believe, at Artomatic a couple times.
Nice.
um, we've had some people purchase some of the work as art, which has been fascinating. We taught little kids, like 10 and 12-year-olds, how to find bad stuff on the network, because it was just like look at the back of a highlights magazine. Find something that doesn't fit. So line, shape, form, color, all of those things that you deal with. And art, you can use to help people, see patterns. And a lot of what we do is pattern matching. So, you can have a bunch of kids running around being intrusion detection, cybersecurity analysts.
So was
Um,
it like, wasn't there, I feel like I've seen this a couple times where like third graders hack voting booths and things.
I don't know about third graders, but it's not all that hard to do. I like the recent meme with the fourth grader who doesn't want to log into Zoom for school and just changes his image to the words connecting. I
Yeah,
thought that
yeah.
was great. But yeah, it's not it's it's just really, hacking's about understanding the difference between what you think is going to happen and what can actually happen, and then
Hmm.
sort of exploiting the difference. So it's a mindset that a lot of people don't have. But if you do have it, it's not such a hard technical problem, if that makes sense. It's just more how you think about the world.
Sure,
Uh,
sure. I mean, I think I understand, but give me an example of what that difference means.
so, for example, if you expect to put in only letters into a password field,
Hmm.
and maybe you put in, and this is oversimplifying it, but maybe you put in funny characters like exclamation points or pound signs, and everybody always puts in the dollar signs, and the code and the system only really expects those letters, but they don't check for it. So
Okay.
if you put in something unexpected, it could blow up the system and lead to all sorts of other problems. So
Got it.
you're really, as a hacker, looking for, you know, what isn't this checking for already, but that it's going to let me do, and then see what happens. You have to be persistent, and you have to be curious, but the technical part, just, you know, a lot of it's social engineering too. You know, a lot of it's convincing people to give you the password over the phone, or that's how phishing works at the end of the day. You can buy software that will break into machines, and you just have to figure out who you want to who you want to hit. So, you know, the principles are easy. You know, obviously doing it at scale or doing it in complicated environments, complicated, but it's not that hard to get started.
Cool.
The
Okay.
Good. No,
No,
good.
go ahead.
As I say, the other perspective I had over the years was, you know, how I got where I'm at is I got, being in DC, got the chance to do national like level response, which was a lot of fun. So we did a lot of the, if you know the power grid was getting hacked, we would do a lot of the national coordination with the power companies, that sort of thing. So having that visibility into what was happening sort of at a world and national level was also just enlightening. I got to go to Eastern Europe to go talk about cybersecurity, and this is actually a fun story. I got an email inviting me to speak at a conference, all expenses paid, in Tbilisi, Georgia, the country of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I was just being phished. I thought I was being attacked. So
Right.
I forwarded the email to the other cybersecurity people and said, "Hey, I'm being phished. Go do what you need to do."
Yeah.
3 or 4 days later, they came back and said, "No, this is above board." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I emailed back, "Sure, if you're going to pay me to go to Eastern Europe to get on stage, I'm not going to say no, but I have to ask why. Why
Right.
me? This doesn't seem applicable." It was like a future energy security problems
Oh
on a
yeah.
cybersecurity panel. I'm like, I don't, like, well, they emailed back from Lithuania and they said, "Well, we had a cybersecurity panelist and they dropped out, but it was it's getting a little bit close, and we really liked your blog post, so you know we want you to come out." I asked the obvious question. Well, I still don't know what the connection is because I don't blog about this. Which blog post did you like? And their answer was the one called "How Not to Give a Shitty Cybersecurity Talk," which was so entirely.
So wait, what was the blog about? What was that particular blog about?
Like art and security. So it was just my place to dump whatever thoughts I had on either the art or the security space.
Right.
And my boss and a friend of ours had all been at the same talk and all took basically the same notes about why it was bad. So we consolidated that and wrote sort of a tongue-in-cheek post.
That's funny.
And
But I guess the question is, what was the conclusion? How do you do a panel badly?
I did, oh man, for example, don't make the panel sound like a bibliography for 20 minutes. Or if you do, bring pillows, you know, so people can sleep. Change your tone of voice beyond, you know, a drone. Speak, because there was a few where people would just get up there and they just not speak for a while, and then it was really bad. Like it was unusually bad. The one we saw. So the whole thing, you couldn't take it seriously. Not the post, but
right. The panel, which is other panels.
Correct, but they were Eastern Europe. I'm actually wonder if a little bit of the sarcasm was lost in translation or something. But whatever, it was a trip to Georgia, so that's
yeah, totally.
That led to a bunch of others. I met a couple of people there who I've rolled around the world with at this point. They're crazy. They both are in DC often. You know, we spend time in the mansion on O Street smoking cigars and playing pool in the middle of the night. And it's people I met in Eastern Europe on a random trip that just our lives have intersected. One of them I go backpacking with every summer.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so it was a neat, just random fluke of life.
Sweet. And actually, while we're on the subject of backpacking, so you are a big hiker, right? You hiked the Appalachian Trail at one point, right?
A bunch of it, not all of it. I mainly had a few months to kill, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to do Burning Man, or my employer didn't care where I lived or where I was for a while. So I vaguely wanted to go south and felt like walking. So Appalachian Trail seemed like a reasonable enough way to do that for a few months. So a lot of people are making miles and they want to make the trip and they want to complete it. I just wanted to be outside for a while and meander. So that took 2 or It's really life-changing. I've been a backpacker since. Prior to that, I hadn't slept outside more than a night
Oh, wow.
in my life, and so it went from that to 2 months. I figured walking in a straight line couldn't be that hard. Um, uh, Doing it alone was a little bit challenging. Not so much from a safety standpoint, but just you run out of easy conversations to have with yourself after a while. So let's think about that movie we liked. That gets old real fast. So you start having to really think about things. There was a Oh man, I hate spiders, but I hate them less than I did when I started. I was a newbie and I had the goofy REI hat on, and it was just so terrible. And I was waving my hiking poles in front of me because there were spider webs everywhere, and
Mhm.
just every 10 feet. It was that time of year, and I was so embarrassed by it until this clearly experienced hiker, like he was sinewy and like had been out there. He was coming the other direction, waving his hiking poles in front of his face, like, all right, okay, so this is okay. Um, the uh, the cutest story I can tell from that, it involves actually death, which is ironic, but everybody has their cute little trail names. As you're going up and down the trail, they have different shelters that you can stay in. There are three walls, basic roof. You sleep on the ground, and in them are trail journals. So there's always a spiral bound notebook with some crummy pen or some beat up pencil, and use it just to say hi to your fellow hikers or let them know, hey, there's no water behind me. That's just a heads up. So they're a lot of fun to read, but it's also how information travels, up and down, up and down the trail. So I checked into a hostel in Southwest Virginia that was just for backpackers. It was some former hiker's 3-car garage where he hung deer carcasses and had cots out for everybody. It was a weird experience,
That's so creepy.
but
Oh
it
my
was
God.
free, which is
That's
great. If you're
so
hiking for months, you're not working. So
I
so yeah.
I mean, if I have to sleep next to a deer carcass, I gotta wonder, am I next? Like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
at least in
It,
my dreams, which
it,
is, yeah.
it was odd. I get there, and the guy runs. His name's Joe. He has something called the Dragon Wagon, which is this 1980s Astro van or something with a big dragon painted on it. It's a death trap, but he lets all the hikers drive it to get into town if they need to. And when I got there, Joe was talking to this guy named Cornflake, was his trail name, and Cornflake had a dog named Shady Security, which is a perfect trail name for a dog. But Cornflake was sad because his friend No Regrets had died on the trail,
Oh, that's
and he was in tears. And so Joe, the house owner, is like, "Hey, I'm gonna take Cornflake into town to a bar to like drown his sorrows, but we have this new guy coming, in a few hours. Can you take the Dragon Wagon and pick him up?" And bear in mind, like I'd been there 10 minutes, but like so right, like this isn't this is I have no idea what's going on. So I drive down, I pick up this older gentleman. He's in his late 50s, early 60s, and we're talking. Is so how long you've been hiking, where et cetera. What's your trail name? And he looks at me, says, "It's No Regrets." And I looked at him, I
oh
said,
shit.
"Do you know you're dead?" He's like, "What?" So I'll
Oh
backstory
my
in a
God.
second. But needless to say, later there was a wonderful reunion,
Aw.
and it was absolutely adorable. But what had happened is this is how gossip on the trail works. Somebody had died on the trail, like nothing tragic, just old age, didn't fall, just expired.
Yeah.
This is the best way to put it. Sad for them, but not a tragedy beyond human life. Uh, and so no regrets. What happens is you get ahead of people for a bit of time. You never walk next to somebody
Yeah,
because you
yeah.
have different legs. You end up at the same place at night a lot of the time, or maybe every few days. But trying to keep up with somebody and keep pace is just usually doesn't work. So no regrets have been ahead of Cornflake for a couple of days and heard about the guy who died. And he stopped in at the shelter where he had died and noticed there wasn't any memorial in the trail journal. So he wrote up a thing about the guy who had passed away, but he didn't sign it. He moves on, decides that his feet hurt. He gets off the trail. Cornflake passes him because he's now off the trail, reads
Yeah,
the trail
yeah.
journal, thinks nothing of it, but he keeps hiking and he never runs into his friend again, who is now behind him. And he just becomes more and more convinced that because they match descriptions about the same age. And so that's the Appalachian Trailiest story I can tell you.
Aw. So wait, so tell me about the reunion. Did you take him to the bar or?
No, they just showed up later. I got to know where the
Okay.
bar was per se. No,
Yeah.
they're just so overjoyed. And what's
Aw.
nice is they didn't know each other ahead of time, but they've been hiking. You know, they've known each other for months now. You know, it's a 5 month, 6 month endeavor to hike the whole thing. So you really get to be close to some folks out there. Um,
Nice.
or split apart from them. I met a couple who was hiking the trail towards their wedding, and they assumed if they were together at the end of the trail, then the wedding was a good idea, and if they
Oh,
weren't, the
no.
wedding was a bad idea.
Jesus.
Yeah,
Were they at least eloping and not spending a lot of money on the wedding?
yeah, it wasn't a big deal, but that was their. Are we sure about this? Well, sure. Let's get in a challenging, closed environment for a few months, and if we don't hate each other, then
Wow.
well, I thought it was a great idea, to be honest.
So wait, did they end up together or?
Never found out. Never found
Aw,
out. We were midway,
too
which
bad.
is which is sad. Um,
Oh,
but it really, I've been backpacking since that was probably 2014 or so, and it's become a relatively huge part of my life. I did 300 miles that trip, and then I did another 300 miles on the West Coast later
Jesus.
on.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Um, we got stalked by a mountain lion out in the West Coast, which was rare and terrifying. Um,
What do I do here? All right. That's really cool. So wait, so tell me about California when you were hiking.
Seattle, this more of the Seattle area. So we did
Okay.
mostly like the Olympic Peninsula and the Cascades and stuff. Oh God, it's gorgeous out there. I can't. There's 3 different temperate rainforests in the Olympic Peninsula, and most people don't realize there's rainforests out there. There's the biodensity is just unbelievable. It looks literally unreal in a lot of places out there. It's the Olympic Peninsula is one of my favorite places in the world. Um, the the Native Americans, the First Nations people out there, you know, have a story about dragons who fought, and all of their crashing onto the ground is what created the mountains.
Oh, cool.
They're neat. You know, you can go out. There's a 17-mile stretch where you can go through a rainforest up to a glacier in the same 17-mile hike. Um, it's unbelievable. Um, the My friend and I, the one from Eastern Europe for that actually, were out there, and that he got ahead of me for a little bit. We were putting down camp, and he just never came back, and I got a little bit worried. So I went ahead, and he's like, "Come here, come here." And about 80 yards from us was a mountain lion, and you don't see a mountain lion unless they want you to see them. It's very rare. They're out there, but you know, proportionally to the number of people there, it's really rare. And he was peeking out from behind a tree, wandered around, coming back. Like he was definitely trying to figure out what we were doing. We were about 8 miles from the nearest, 6 to 8 miles
Oh
from
my
the nearest
gosh.
human, and
Jesus.
but it was getting dark, so we had to go back to where we were camping was basically the small stand of trees or the acre of trees that he was in. So
Jesus.
I was going to be hammocking, and I'm like, I'm not going to be like wrapped food for this guy.
Yes,
Like
seriously.
I can't do that. So we had to find a clearing, and we sharpened a stick. We were so dumb, but it really was not not necessarily a great thing. But we stayed up all night. We were back to back a lot of it. I had to put a tarp over myself to keep, you know, because I couldn't hammock, so I slept on the ground under a tarp. And every bit of wind that came, he would wake up and like, Jack. He was in a tent. He's like, Jack, there's a mountain lion's back, and I go check. It was great until there was an actual elk in our campsite who wouldn't
Oh my
leave.
God.
So I'm sleeping now on the ground, and the elk does not give two shits that I'm there at all. Does not care. I cannot scare it away. It's maybe it's hiding from the mountain lion. I don't know. But I had to stand up and wander around for hours because it just wouldn't leave. And I didn't want it to, it wasn't going to attack me, but I didn't want it to step on me because it didn't.
Right. Yeah, that would be a problem.
Luckily, that morning, on a whim, my buddy had bought a book for his nephew called How Not to Get Eaten in the Wild. So we went through
Oh
that
my
over the
God, that's
campfire
so
as well.
funny.
Yeah. So that was a pretty dramatic.
That's hilarious. Oh my God. So did you just move on and the mountain lion didn't follow you, or?
No, we had to spend the night. Yeah, we had to spend the night, and by the next morning, we moved on. I'm sure it had been long gone, but still, you just don't know. And,
Yeah, no, of course. So you were working for an NGO for a while, speaking at different conferences, and then you eventually, sorry, jumping back.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
And then you went to your current employer from there? Like, how did you?
I was in the government for a while.
Wait. Yeah, so didn't you do some training of sorts?
Yeah. So at the government, I was at Idaho National Lab and a couple of the different agencies doing the response stuff, and then I went to a nonprofit, and this is when I got to hike. They just didn't really care where I was. They were doing more of educational cybersecurity services for a power company. So yeah, I started doing training on how to build risk frameworks and really just how to arrange information generally. It was a lot of fun. We got to use Legos and crayons in some of our sessions. It's nothing like giving a bunch of people in suits bags of Legos to go help them work through a cybersecurity session.
Nice. Wait, explain that exercise because that sounds awesome.
Where it was teaching people that the way you arrange information just because it's logical doesn't mean it's helpful. So like we would give them different exercises. Some people had bags of Legos that were the same color. Other people had bags of Legos that were the same size. Both of those were logical arrangements of Legos, but if we asked them to, hey, build us something red, obviously the people with bags of Legos arranged by red would do better. And hey, build us a car, the people with different size Legos would do better, do faster. So we were teaching them that, I've been working on helping out with a national cybersecurity framework, as many other people did. And I found that they couldn't agree. Their challenge wasn't so much the content, it was conveying it and organizing it in a way that was useful for purpose. So that's what a lot of that class ended up being. And also reinforcing that cybersecurity, what people weren't doing as well as they thought. That, they are building best practices and they were more of common practices. And I was in a high-level government agency meeting a long time ago, and somebody really high up was reading a review of a report. They got to the first page. These guys had worked for months on this, and she asked a really simple question. The report was what industry thought about cybersecurity and what they thought needed to be done. And she looked up and she said, why are we asking a bunch of people that we already know don't know the answers? And that kind of ended the entire meeting. But that's a lot of what was happening then, is people weren't being very successful. They were spending a lot of money, but they weren't keeping bad people out very reliably. I like to think we've gotten better since then.
So that's why they were common practices, but they weren't good practices.
Correct. There were things a lot of people were doing. They were not necessarily things that were working well. Certainly not for the amount of money that they cost to do. It's pretty low return. So after that nonprofit went on for a while, it gave me access. It let me do sort of my own thing for a while, teaching and working on different projects. Like I was on a project to help define confidence building measures between nations on cybersecurity. A confidence building measure is like the red phone hotline between Moscow and the president, from a nuclear weapon standpoint. Okay. It's basically making sure that you don't go to war by mistake.
Okay.
So like this is why we train with China. Even if there's an adversarial potential relationship. So you understand, you build confidence, you build trust, you build communication, so that if you're going to get into a fight, you want to do it on purpose. And so some of the stuff we were working on is how do you, if you can't tell who's attacking you and you can't tell and if there's no difference between like military and civilian infrastructure, then how do you build that kind of confidence between nations? And sort of
Right, right.
really interesting sort of stuff to work on. But that sort of petered out. It's a small nonprofit. Eventually that you want to do something larger, and that's how I ended up at the bank. Um,
Nice. So they saw that you were doing awesome works, and so they recruited you.
yeah, I mainly through Twitter, which is how I think my last like 3 jobs have occurred more than anything else. There's a It's a pretty small community for what I do. So at this point, we know each other, and the bank's given me the opportunity it's sort of a greenfield space. Nobody else really has had the resources to solve some of the problems I'm working on. So I'm a little bit out on my own, which is fun and it's a little bit scary. Um, a lot of the smaller companies are, they're dealing with big obvious problems still. So, we spend a gargantuan amount of money on cybersecurity. So, we get to see the edge cases and fix some of the problems before other people get to it. That's put me on the board for a couple of different nonprofits right now. So both in information security risk. I'm on the board for a Society of Information Risk Analysts, which is the really geeky of the geeky nonprofits, and then there's another one that's more about business cybersecurity from a business standpoint, and so that's put me in the business, sort of helping to run conferences these days.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
So what are some of the big problems that challenges that you have seen at your job that you think would surprise people?
It's how much it's a communication coordination problem, and this isn't my job particularly. This is really writ large. If you look at the history of like cybersecurity, it started out with a bunch of smart people who had a pretty narrow interest, like a bunch of sysadmins, a bunch of technologists who were genuinely interested in it, going, hey, bad guys can break in. But back then nobody cared because computers weren't hooked to all that many important things. And somewhere in the 2000s, things started ramping up to the point where you needed to protect companies, and everyone sort of rushed around looking for how do we do this. And so they looked at the technologists who'd been running the systems, who'd come up with technical solutions to cybersecurity problems, and said, oh, okay, we can do these things. And that turned into an industry. So it's a very technical focused industry, like patch your computer, or put in a detection system. But those solutions only look at part of the problem. For example, if your business keeps making thoughtless, if it keeps rushing projects too often, then you're going to have quality problems in the result, and quality problems are what hackers exploit. Like at the end of the day, like you've done something not as elegantly or not as cleanly as you would have liked, and so the system can be made to do more or less than you want it to. So there's some amount of elegance and time and thought that has to go into how these things are put together. And so, from a business standpoint, if you have processes that aren't clear, then people can do something to computer to exploit that. So it's very much a human problem. It's very much a communications problem. Way more than people think. You can't put a computer in a room and go, okay, we have security. It even gets into like appetite for, like how much more important is it to keep a bad guy out than it is for you to keep doing business? That's not a technical call. That's a leadership call. And and in some cases you have different priorities. The government's the cleanest example. Like if the FBI has a prosecute and convict mission, they don't really have a defend mission. But people get, in order for society to do well, you have to have law enforcement. But if you tell people what's going on to protect them, sometimes you can't defend them. So there's competing interests, I guess, in the space.
Do you want to say a little bit more about what that means?
Sure. Like your CEO has different priorities for himself that are hopefully mostly aligned with the priorities of the business as a whole,
Mhm.
um, but maybe not the same. And your middle management is trying to achieve performance objectives, but the larger picture isn't their responsibility. So, how do they balance the larger picture at that level um, versus their own interests, and their own responsibilities in sort of a silo. And so when you start asking how much is security worth to people, um, it turns out there's no one answer, and there's not even one answer in an organization. Um, and we have another good example would be critical infrastructure in the U.S. Your transportation companies might think that they're secure, but if if the citizens aren't represented in that conversation, maybe it's not secure enough for the citizens. Maybe it doesn't make us happy. It might make them happy. So you have to find a way to take all this technology and reconcile maybe competing interests in safety and security. So that's that top level human aspect of this is where I think most people don't realize it's complicated.
Very cool. And so you've done, and I'm piecing this together because I don't think this is now, but are you allowed to talk about the story that you told me about TSA?
I'd rather not.
Totally. Okay, never mind.
It's all good.
Uh, so you're, yeah, but it is so, okay, sorry. Totally lost my train of thought. Oh, I know. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about while I've still got you is, you and I met doing karaoke. But how has that been going since you've moved to North Carolina?
I so bad it was bad for my health. Holy cow! I found Charlotte had, at least prior to the pandemic, at least 2 7-night-a-week karaoke bars, like dedicated karaoke bars.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oof.
yeah. So
So
I had prior to about as of 20, I think for all of 2019, I probably sang more songs than anybody in Charlotte. There's a reasonable chance, certainly at one of those bars. So it's been a huge part of my life. I started out the story of me singing is when I was a kid. I got dragged into the rest of my many siblings were in a children's musical theater production. I was in middle school. Anybody could be in it. Anybody could, like literally all takers. It was community theater, but it was musical theater. So if you had a speaking part, you had to sing. And they tried to teach me. They bribed me. They cajoled me. They got angry at me. They did everything they could. And finally, they made my part mute and taught me to pantomime. Because I wasn't good enough for all-comer singing. And I carried that with me for a long time, and it wasn't good. But as you know, like our mutual friends are all karaoke people. So if you
Great.
hang out with them or live with them, as the case may be, then eventually you go. I had the turning point for me from a like important standpoint, other than socially, which actually, let me talk about socially for a second. One of the things I like about karaoke is alcohol makes you a little bit myopic, as opposed, people think it relaxes your inhibitions, and it really doesn't, so much as clouds out other priorities than what you're facing at the moment. And that's if Malcolm Gladwell writes about that a bit. I think it's an
Cool.
interesting, yeah. There's some writing about it. It's an interesting observation. So when you're at a karaoke bar, just you have people from all walks of life, especially a good karaoke bar, who otherwise would never speak to each other. They would never interact with each other, and they find common ground on the silliest, cutest, most adorable things, the different songs they see together. So I love the role that a good karaoke bar can play, because
Nice.
it's incredibly social, it's incredibly community building. You know, I'm not talking about the karaoke machine in the corner of the dive bar,
Right.
in the middle of nowhere, because people will potentially hate you in those. Like you're not supposed to use that. You're a tourist, aren't you? So when I was traveling, after backpacking, I spent half a year-ish, sort of just Airbnb-ing in different places and kind of bumming around. And it was really nice to go to whatever the local karaoke bar was to find some connection with a bunch of people, at least for a short period of time. That if you're only going to be in a place for a week, it was a great way to connect with other humans.
Yeah.
Um, when I was in Charlotte, I had this neat experience. I'd gone to New York City for work and with the Federal Reserve Bank and a bunch of very serious 50 to 60-year-old people all decided to go karaokeing. And one of the younger women who I ended up being friends with came along, and it turns out I found out a year later that she didn't like her karaoke performance and had decided to take singing lessons as a result. And she found it really hyper rewarding and suggested that I do it. So when I came to Charlotte, I actually started taking singing lessons, which was really an amazing experience for me from like a body awareness standpoint. Because one of the things that I didn't know, and I don't know how many people don't, is how much more aware, if you weren't already, you are of your breathing, of your body, of like there's a lot of times it became a therapy session because my vocal coach would be like, so like obviously you've had a crappy day because you can't, but like you can tell, and so it became this really neat body presence and body awareness exercise as well as sing lessons. So I got a whole lot out of that experience beyond becoming more passable than I had been in the past.
That's really cool. So what how long did you take voice lessons for?
Better off and on for more than a year, so yeah, quite a while.
Good times.
At some point, like this is as good as you're gonna get. Just kind of
Of
don't worry
course.
about it. So funny thing, what I found out is I can no longer, after karaokeing so much, I can no longer keep time with music. Because I got so used to watching the visual cues.
Oh
Because
yeah,
I never
totally.
performed before, so like I stopped listening, and the bar is noisy, so you
Right,
can't
right.
always hear. So you actually start tuning, or at least I did, start tuning out audio cues. So where I
Interesting.
really focused was actually being on stage with an actual band, with actual musicians, so that I could get back to actually being able to keep some time. So that was a really weird surprise, was just how weirdly trained karaoke had made me.
So wait, what did you say? You did a sang with a band? What was the band?
Just local, like a couple of them were glorified recitals, but we went on a couple of open mic nights around town. Once on a street festival, which was great. We sang in the street
Nice.
with a couple of people playing.
So what songs did you sing?
I don't remember then. These days, I'm doing a pretty good hallelujah. Out up on stage, we did everything from one time we did Glycerin by Bush. We did gosh, what's his name? British kid that nobody likes. I can't remember
Ed
his name.
Sheeran?
Yes. he has. I knew.
It's music, but I don't know why everybody does.
No, I don't either. Well played, Brett. Well played.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's hilarious.
I did a bluesy Ed Sheeran up on stage. So I kept picking. I did a Cure song. I did Just Like Heaven. Unfortunately, I kept picking things I couldn't really do well because that's what we ended up practicing. If that makes sense. Like we didn't focus for a while on stuff that I could easily do. So a mixed success.
Okay, but still, that sounds like fun.
Oh, it was a blast. It was absolutely worth it. I
That's awesome.
loved it.
Besides, so are you living in Charlotte? Yeah, you're living in Charlotte generally, right?
Yeah, although I just committed to staying out here for another 3 months, so I think I'm going to officially move out momentarily. Like
Okay.
and
But so
then
what are your favorite places in Charlotte? If someone were to go to Charlotte, beyond like the top tourist sites to the extent that you actually really like them, what
Uh,
would you recommend people do?
so there's a few different neighborhoods that you can go to depending what you like. Um, the artsy punk district would be Plaza Midwood. This is where it's a little more it's a little bit more gritty. You're gonna find more metal shows, that sort of thing. But there's a lot of great bars in that area. I liked what's called Noda, north of Davidson. It's it's more arts than punk if you had to balance the two out. It's where one of my karaoke bars were. And honestly, that Noda 101's a karaoke bar there. It's one of the better bars karaoke side of Charlotte. It's a great vibe. The staff is great. The people are great. And there's also South End is where I was living, which is more of your early 20s. I'm going to have a banking career sort of social vibe. The nice thing about that is there's a light rail that goes through town. It's sort of a token mass transit. It doesn't go very many places, but there's a walking trail that you can take for miles. It goes straight through the heart of Uptown, which is something unique to Charlotte. They call it Uptown. I don't remember the history. But those are the 3 districts: South End, Noda, and Plaza Midwood. You'd want to check out, and just want any of those areas. You can just sort of wander around and find something to do.
Fun.
There's some nice museums. NASCAR headquarters is here, I believe. It's not the headquarters, one of their central locations. If that's your speed. Top of the Ritz has probably one of the best cocktails in town, or it did a year ago.
What was the cocktail?
No, it's just the cocktails in general. It's one of the we have a few speakeasies these days, which are all pretty cute. I don't know. You've got I can't believe I left this out. Come to Charlotte if you like breweries.
Oh yeah.
There's probably 4 within walking distance of my old apartment. They're all over the place.
Awesome.
Some of them are pretty good. They about 5 years ago or 6 years ago now, they changed the rules and they built 100 breweries in town since.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like DC did that about that same time too.
Yeah, that's very, 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 very DC like.
They realized that, actually you're not all actually the Green Hat gin, or New Columbia Distillers, was the first distillery to be opened in DC in 100 years. And at least a while ago when you went on the tour, they would talk to you about the process of updating the government regulation to go through to open it. And apparently the process when they started was are you mafia? Okay, but are you mafia? Are you mafia? Uncle Tony who works in sanitation.
Wow, that's fabulous.
It was really funny. Anyway. So anyway, well, very cool. Well, anything else you want to chat about before we sign off here?
No, it's just good seeing you. I'm
really
glad we have to check.
Thank you so much for doing this. And it's just always lovely to see you. Are you coming up to DC anytime? Well, I guess travel is not something we know if we're going to do ever again.
Yeah, I'll come post vaccine. I'm in the 1%er. I don't see any reason to
leave your
no. I love Instacart's my hero. Those people, anybody still delivering shit's my hero. I love them.
Totally.
So as soon as I can.
Cool.
Might not be soon. All right, lady.
Well, great to see you. Thanks again. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.